How's it going, everybody? As we progress through our vSphere training, uh, we are going to be hitting all the 5.5 stuff first, and then as we progress through all the entire blueprint and talk about the different techniques and capabilities that are out there, we're going to be taking a look at how all the details go through with vSphere and vCenter server and all the stuff you can do with it. And then eventually towards the end, we'll get into 6.0, because that's just recently out in the last couple of months. So we're going to talk about how you can upgrade that and go through some of the other features and functions. Before we get into any of that stuff, though, one of the things that I want to do is give you guys a breakdown as to how my environment is set up. Now, normally what you're going to be seeing from a instructor, at least this is how I've learned it from instructors that I've used through either any vendor you might be able to find online that does VMware training, not just vSphere in general, but VMware strictly, is typically what they have is they have a desktop or a laptop of some sort with a lot of memory, a lot of RAM, with a decent sized CPU, and they take VMware Workstation and they build their own virtual environment inside of VMware Workstation. Now you can totally do that, and that's actually how I was doing it the first time when I went through to get my VCP. That's exactly what I did. I took my IBM server, I installed Windows 7 onto it, I installed VMware Workstation 9, got everything running, and went through and followed along, made sure I had to pause the videos where I needed to make sure I knew what was going on. And then as I would finish up, I'd be able to do whatever they did in the video and taking notes as I went along. Sometimes it would take me 3, 4, 5 times through a video to make sure I got all the details out of it, because there's a lot of information to remember. So now, as we go through our setup here, I'm going to break down how I have it set up. And it's a little more unique than how you normally would set it up, but I have a little bit more layering in places, and I'll draw this out to give you guys an idea of how this works out. I don't mean to confuse you if it's hard for you to follow along if you're not 100% sure how I have the architecture built, but as you go through, you'll pretty easily figure out that it's not very complicated. So before I get started with any of the technical content, the first thing that you want to point out that this is the Vsphere Client, and you would log into it through this guy. So you would type in the IP address or the name of the vCenter server or vSphere, your virtual host, and you would type in the username and the password, and then hit login. And they might be asking, well, how do I type in what username and password do I know how to type in? Well, I will be getting to that in just a moment when we actually go through and we deploy 2 more virtual hosts. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you guys a background as to how everything is set up within the architecture that I have set up here to make everything work. And then from there we'll get into how you would set up, deploying the hypervisor onto a blade or a rack mount server, and then from there what you would need to do to get everything operational. So as we go through here, it'll be pretty straightforward for the most part. But if you have any questions or concerns, or you're not quite sure how something is working, feel free to drop me a line on YouTube. I do try to get back to people as quickly as I can. So anyway, the first thing that I want to point out to you here is, because this is vSphere, I have a bunch of virtual machines already running. And I have my CPU usage up here, I have my memory usage down here. I'm running about 24 gigs of RAM right now, and about a quarter of my total, maybe closer to a third of my CPU utilization. This isn't much. So I've got plenty of RAM available, probably 2.5 times what I could probably get out, maybe 3. So what I've done is I have set up a Esxi software HBA, host bus adapter, and I went out to another computer which is serving up 300 gigabytes of a hard drive that I have on a remote computer. It's located on my network, but it's not on the same box as this guy. And I have that set up, and it's serving up Esxi virtual storage. So it basically just takes a chunk of hard drive space, and it serves it up as an iSCSI target for my ESXi host to go out to and use as remote storage. Now, I won't be showing you how that works because that's a separate software piece altogether. I use Starwind software to get that working, and it's a free download. You download it, you get it installed, and you are able to create a virtual hard drive, take a chunk of your hard drive, and then serve it up and go from there. So it's pretty straightforward for the most part, but it's pretty straightforward if you understand what's going on. So just to give you guys an idea of what this looks like and how it all breaks down, it's relatively straightforward. So we have, and that's how you get this ESXi SAN right here. That's how this piece comes into play. And I'll walk you through how this works. So now what I'm doing with ESXi551, 552, DC1, vCenter, and with OpenFiler, these are all operational and running. What I do is I actually set up their storage is not on this local disk. This data store right here, this is the local disk, and I've only got about 40 gigs of free on it. So for me, it makes more sense to set up the storage on remote connectivity. So again, the computer that I have Starwind software enabled on, and I'm serving up that 300 gigs of file share, or if you will, the SAN array. I've got that set up on the storage area network, is what that stands for, SAN. I have that being served up to this host that I'm connected to right now, and that's how I'm able to pick and choose where I stick my storage, or where my storage goes to. So if I was to open up the hard drive, you would see a bunch of virtual machines configured on there. So now when I go through here in just a moment here, I'm going to show you guys how to spin this up. OpenFiler, it connects back to ESXi SAN, so does all these guys. So if I was to right click on here and go to Browse Data Store, you would see I have all this stuff sitting in here. And I have a lot of different things in here. I got some different ISO images on the storage, and this way here I can go into it, and I've been having a lot of issues lately with getting things like they call it Pixie Boot, where you're able to boot from LAN and things like that. I've been having an issue with that, getting that situated, so I just uploaded the operating systems to this, and I'll show you guys. I'll show you guys how to do that. To do it both a folder and a file. It's pretty easy to do, but you just have to go through and break down what it does. So I have several different VM port groups here, and these are just port groups where you can actually put the virtual network card from the virtual machine inside of the port group. It acts like a switch, and you can set up different port groups to be able to talk to each other and go from there. So we'll take a look at how that would break down. But before I get any farther in here and confuse anybody, first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually deploy two hosts. The host, now you might be asking, well, what's a host? A host, like we mentioned in the previous video, is going to be the device that you install the ESXi hypervisor on, which allows you to virtualize the hardware resources. So the CPU, the memory, the network, and the storage allows you to virtualize all of that and serve it up through the Vsphere Client or the vCenter server, depending on how you're managing your devices. Allows you to serve that up to give over towards your guest operating systems. So the abstraction layer, or the virtualization layer, takes care of virtualizing all the hardware resources south of it. So all the hardware stuff that it's on top of. Consider your hypervisor as a Windows 7 operating system, or a Server 2008 operating system. It allows you to run applications and things like that. Then you can run, for instance, VMware Workstation on top of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new virtual machine. And the way you do is you click File, New, or you can click on, you can right click on this guy, but you have to be clicked on this guy up here. This guy right here is going to be the host. If you click down here and you right click on here and try to go new virtual machine, it's not going to let you create a new virtual machine. If you click on File, virtual machine is grayed out. So you have to click on the host, which is the host IP address. Right click on here and go New Virtual Machine. So you have that. And now we're going to go to a typical configuration. You can go custom and add some other more details in there. Typical takes a lot of that other stuff away. I'm going to go custom simply for the fact that I have to manipulate some things before I go in here, before I deploy it. I'm going to click on Next. And this is going to be ESXi 5-5-4. And I'm going to do 554 and 555. Because right now, this guy right here is technically 553. And I'm going to be tweaking, I'm going to be doing some work on this guy as we go through here. And if, as we're going through, if it seems like I'm jumping around a little bit in some different areas, I have to move stuff around to get it to work. But I'll try not to do that with you guys live so that you guys aren't getting confused. So I'm going to click on Next. And it's going to ask me, where do I want to store this? So I'm going to say, okay, well, if we go back to name and location, this is the name of the box, ESXi554. Click Next. It's going to ask me, where do I want to store the hard drives? Well, I'm going to click right here into ESXi SAN and click on that one. I'll show you guys how to get this working as we go through, because you're going to have to eventually share what they refer to as shared storage. And shared storage is that storage I mentioned in the previous video, which allows you to share the same storage among multiple virtual hosts. That allows you to do things like vMotion and things like that as we're going along. So I'm going to click on Next, and then it's going to ask me, well, which virtual machine version do you want to run? Well, in this particular version, I can run up to VMware version 8, and that's fine. And that's only on 5.0 and later. If I want to run anything earlier than that, I have to go on to VMware 7, VM version 7 for 4.0 or 4.x. So I'm going to click on Next. It's going to ask me, what is the operating system? Well, the operating system we're going to be running is Linux, and we're going to scroll down to other 64-bit. Okay, I just use that. It makes it easy to manipulate what we're going to be doing on. We're going to click Next. It's going to ask us how many sockets and how many cores. Well, we're going to give it one socket, but we're going to give it 2 cores. And this is the very bare minimum for your CPU, for setting up your host. We'll click on Next. It's going to ask us how much memory do we want to allocate to it. By default, we give it 384 megabytes. Well, that's not quite going to do it for us. We need to do at least 4 gigabytes. I'm going to give it 8, which is what I've given these other boxes right here. I'm going to click on Next. It's going to ask me, well, which network do you want to put it in? And as you can see, I have plenty of networks that I have here. By default, VM network is the default. VM network actually connects to my management network, which is the 192.168.1 subnet, which happens to be the same subnet that all of my computers on my local area network are connected to. I'm going to give it the E1000 network adapter, and I'm going to give it, I could go in here and give it multiple NIC cards. I will be able to manipulate that later on, and I'll show you guys how to do that. Click on Next. It's going to say, well, what type of SCSI controller do you want to use? Well, I'm going to use the LSI Logic Parallel, which is what they recommend by default. So I don't ever mess with the SCSI controller, simply for the fact that VMware chooses the best. Click Next, and it's going to create a new virtual hard disk, or I could use an existing virtual hard disk if I wanted to. I don't go in here and manipulate any of this, so I don't see a real reason to go in here. You could use a previously configured virtual disk if you want to. I've never done that, so I don't even bother with it. We'll click on Next. It's going to say, well, how much hard drive space do you want to give it? Well, we're going to use thin provisioning, and I'll explain how thin provisioning works coming up, but I just want to get these guys spun up. And the idea behind this is, how do you want VMware to handle your storage for your virtual machines? So you have 3 different variations that you can use. You can do thick provision lazy zeroed, thick provision eager zeroed, and thin provision. Now, like I said, I'm not going to go through all of that right now, but I'll show you guys how this works coming up. And I'm going to give it a total of, 50 gig. And the reason I'm giving it 50 gig is because of the fact that that's going to be set up on this box right here, and I'm going to then eventually give it shared storage. So you guys will see how that comes out later on. I'm going to click on Next. and it's what device node do you want to give it. We could go in here and choose what we want to give it. I'm going to choose 00. That's fine. Independent disks. I don't usually choose this, but I'll cover this later on. I'm going to click on next. There's a question, how come you're not covering the hard drives? Because I'll be covering that in the storage section. There's a lot of storage that we're going to have to cover when it comes to understanding fiber channel versus iSCSI and a virtual hard disk versus thin provisioning. I'll cover all that then. So I'm going to click on next. This is kind of a recap of what we have done, and we're good to go. And we're going to click on now you can edit the virtual machine settings before completion. I don't have to do that because I've already done it. I'm going to click on finish. And let's see here. Yep, we're good to go. Now what I've got to do now is, now it's down here at the bottom, as you can see, it was getting ready to get that situated. Now I have to click on back in here, and I have to click on edit settings. Now you said, well, you don't have to edit the settings. Well, actually I do. So I have to get rid of the floppy drive, remove that guy. I don't want the floppy drive in there. And then I have to click over here on the CD/DVD drive, and I have to tell the virtual machine where to find its operating system. So I'm going to click on Data Store ISO file, click on Browse. I'm going to double click on ESXi5. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. I'm going to click on VMvisor, which is ESXi5 Hypervisor. Click on that, click OK. And then I'm going to click on Power On, connect to Power On. If I don't click that on, it's going to be like you don't physically have the cable, the power cable, plugged into your CD/DVD drive on your computer. Then it won't boot. We'll click OK. And that's in progress and it's completed. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to click on Power On. And now as you can see down at the bottom here, it's powering on, it's completed. I'm going to click on this console tab up here. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually click back off the console. And I'm going to click this little tab right here. It says Open Console. I could do that, or I could right click on it and go Open Console. Alright, so right now it's in the process of booting up the ESXi installer. It's pretty straightforward for the most part. But it can be kind of confusing, so I'm going to walk you through how all this stuff is set up. I'm going to pause the video where I need to because I don't need to sit here and explain to you every step of the way. For the most part, it's relatively straightforward once you understand what to do. And the reason why I'm doing this now rather than later on is I want you guys to see how a host would get deployed without any additional fluff of doing it through like vCenter Server or anything like that. And the first few videos that we're going to do are going to be just vSphere specifically, to where we're not going to be in vCenter Server. We're going to have some other things to go through, like if you don't have vCenter Server available in your environment, or maybe you're a company that's too small to run it, or something along those lines. So we're going to take a look at that as long as we go along. And there's a question: a vCenter Server is one of those overpriced bundles. Like I said, you may not need it. And the reason I say that is because I've worked with some clients that they're very small. You know, they have let's say they have the base license for, I think is just Essentials, and whatever that comes out to for on their price point. I think it's like $500. And don't quote me on the price though, I honestly don't know. So you go out and you get Essentials Plus, or I'm sorry, the Essentials license, and that allows you to do basic optimization. You can go in there, you can create a SCSI adapter, you can get a hard drive in through SAN array, things like that. It does very, very basic things. And I've worked with several companies, like for instance, churches are very popular with that. A lot of churches that I've worked with, all they do is they go in where when you're working with the client, you have, let's say for instance, you have just a basic setup where it's just a host, a couple of virtual machines, and away you go. You don't have the need for vMotion or high availability or fault tolerance and storage profiles and host profiles and advanced features and stuff like that. That's what vCenter server is designed for. So we're going to take a look at how that goes as we go along. But now, there's another question: is this the same? Is this setup similar, or how close is it to the real deployment of ESXi? This is exactly what you're going to see when you deploy ESXi. So that's why I'm walking you through it out of the gate, just so you guys can see how the install process works. We're going to take a look at, like I said, we're going to take a look at a few things in vSphere, and then we're going to move into vCenter and then go from there. So as you can see right here, we have the ESXi5 installation, and one of the key things you want to pay attention to is before you go out and you actually get a server to run ESXi, the best thing to do is check VMware's compatibility guide to see if VMware has already tested that hardware with that CPU and with that amount of RAM to run comfortably ESXi. And you might say, well, that's CPU. It depends on what your platform comes with. It might come with an AMD, it might come with Intel. I find that computers that are running VMware run better on Intel. That's just my experience with the VMware. So I'm going to click inside of this guy. You see the hand moving around. I'm going to click inside of it, which now it disappears. Now I've captured that host with my mouse. I'm going to hit the enter key, and then it goes through the EULA, End User License Agreement. So I'm going to hit F11 to accept and continue, which says I'm not going to do anything illegal with it. I'm going to hit F11 to accept it. And now what it's doing is it's scanning the available hard drives. And now remember, I've given it a 50 gig hard drive. Now if you have a USB drive or something like that that plugs into the host, then that's going to be one of those things where it'll detect that as well. So the thing we need to do now is it's already selected this, so we're going to go ahead and hit enter to say yes, we want to do that. And it says HBA1. Okay, so that's going to be our main hard drive. And we're going to hit enter. And it says it accepted that. We're going to go to our keyboard input. I live in the US, so I'm going to use US default. The password, you can use whatever you like. It needs to be at least 8 characters long, though, as long as you saw that. I'm just going to use a very, very basic password of just password, all lowercase. PASSWORD, tab down, PASSWORD, and passwords match, and hit enter. Now it's scanning the system, and on the back end, it's making sure that everything matches. You know, virtualization is enabled. You've got the right amount of memory, the right amount of CPU, all that type of stuff is good to go. So the initial setup is just to check the hard drive, make sure the hard drive is good. And then now we're doing scanning the system. This piece is going to take a couple of moments. It might squawk at me for virtualization, but I'm not too concerned with it right now because I know I have the virtualization engine turned on in my BIOS of the actual hardware BIOS of the IBM server. And I'm running an IBM 3650 M2 with 64 gigs of RAM. And I'm running Intel Xeon processors. It's recommended to use Intel Xeon simply for the fact that I find it to be a little better to run with ESXi and go from there. So once this guy goes along, and there's a question, is this going to be the setup? If you do another host, is it going to be the exact same setup? It will be. And normally what I do is as soon as when setting it up, I make sure to put the network adapter in the VM network port group. What that does is it puts it in the same management domain as my computer that I'm recording on. So DCP will work, so that for the ESXi host, I'll be able to go out and pull an IP address from my DCP server, which happens to be a Cisco router, and from there I'll be able to go in and be able to manipulate the settings, and I will make sure that whatever IP address it gives me, I set that as the static address. Now it's telling me that hardware virtualization is not enabled in the BIOS, which I know is not correct, so I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to hit enter to continue, and now it's asking me, do you want to install, the installer is configured to install ESXi5 on HBA1, which happens to be our main hard drive, our 50 gig hard drive. So I'm going to say this disk will be repartitioned, which means it's going to be formatted, repartitioned for it, and everything will be good to go. I'm going to hit F11 to install, and then away it goes. Now this is the part where it's basically, you know, if I play Jeopardy's music in the background, that do 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 do. I'm not going to make you guys wait through that. So It's going to take a few minutes. I think it takes about 10 total to get installed. So I'm going to pause the video, but I'm going to walk you through a couple of minor details as we're going along through here. So let me minimize that. I'm going to click on the host real quick. I'm going to click on configuration, and here's what I have going on here. As you can see, I've got quite a few things going on. I've got a bunch of VMware port groups. Notice how VMnext 0 is the only one being used. So this side right here is the physical side. This right here, this side over here, is the virtual side. You see all these computers put into here. Now you notice there's repeats: ASA-V2, Viral, ASA-V2, Viral, ASA-1000V. They're repetitive. That doesn't mean I have the same device installed multiple times. I just happen to have given that virtual machine several virtual network adapters, and I've placed them into different VMware port groups. So if I clicked on ASA-V2 right here, and I was to click on right-click and go on to Edit Settings, it's got 10 adapters, and I've placed different adapters in different VM port groups. So VM network, flat 1. If you actually run, I run Viral on the back end. It's actually turned off at the moment, but I run Viral, which is basically, it's a virtual machine that Cisco puts out, and it allows you to test different operating systems and stuff like that. I'm not really feeling it right now, but it is what it is. But I have this virtual ASA here running, or it's actually powered off, but it's installed. And I put I put his different adapters into different VMware port groups, so I have different access to different things. So as I'm clicking along through here and I scroll through here, this is my actual main port group. This is the if you look right here, I have a management network address. This means I happen to have this is a VM kernel port. A VMware kernel port is going to be a layer 3 address, a layer 3 management interface. If you notice, I have a bunch of other port groups, but I don't have anything else in here that allows me to do a whole lot of other stuff with it. So I've got the port groups, and I put multiple network cards on a virtual machine, and then I'm able to put those different virtual ports, network adapters into different port groups, and then go from there. So it's pretty straightforward. And as you can see, I have a lot of different capabilities set up in here. And as we're going through, we're going to be taking a look at a lot of how this stuff is set up. But it's relatively straightforward for the most part. Now, remember, this is my production home network. This is how I do when you guys are watching my videos and other stuff, this is like the behind the scenes to how I have everything set up. So a lot of this stuff is pretty straightforward for the most part. But as we go through here, we're going to be setting up a dedicated section for networking, storage, hard drives. As we go along, it'll be pretty straightforward. So I'm going to click back on here, and we're 28%, so we're in good shape. So there's a question: what's the breakdown with the memory? Well, the way that I have my memory set up is I have 64 total gigs of RAM, and I have 8 2.8 gigahertz processors. Breaks down to I have 2 sockets, 4 cores per socket, 16 logical processors. Now I'm able to virtualize this. Now the one thing about VMware that you won't be able to do is you can't lie about the processor. You can lie about the memory, you can lie about the storage, and you can lie about how many actual network cards it's going to have. But you cannot lie about a CPU. You can lie about how many or how you divide that CPU up, but the actual processor type, you cannot lie about that. Because basically virtualization, that's what you're doing, is you're lying to something, saying, okay, this is how much you're getting allocated. I have 100 gigs of RAM, I have 100 CPUs, I have 100 gigs of storage, and I'm going to give you 10 gigs of RAM. I'm going to give you, I'm going to divide that up. You're going to get 10% of everything I have, and this way here you're going to be able to go in there and separate it up. That's the whole point of virtualization, is you're able to take the quantity of something, so the sum of all of your hardware resources, and then you're able to through vSphere and through vCenter Server, you're able to divide those total resources up to individual computers, individual guest operating systems. And every one of these virtual machines is technically a guest operating system. Now normally I'm doing mine for a lab. I've got a lot of stuff going on in here, but you might have, I know some guys that are running a bunch of CSRs, which are cloud services routers. They allow you, people like me that are hardcore Cisco guys. I'm studying for my CCIE, so I spend a lot of time in Cisco. That's normally what I do. I'm a Cisco engineer for my day-to-day job, and I'm also trying to bring my VMware skills up to pace. So that's why I'm doing this training, because I've spent a lot of time on VMware. I want to try to help you guys out as much as I can. So as we're going through, I try to bridge that knowledge gap. So we have our computers in here, and each one of these would technically be like another Windows server or something like that. And there's a question, can you separate out per VLAN? Yes, you can. And we're going to take a look at that as well. And whenever you have per VLAN, and you set up a network, whatever VLAN to NIC mapping you do, so virtual to physical adapter, you're typically going to have that connection on the remote end. So the upstream end to your switch is typically going to be a trunk, because you're going to be doing more than one VLAN. So we're going to take a look at that as we go through here, and take a look at a lot of different features. But then again, I'm going to be walking through how this stuff works as we go through. So the installation is complete, which is good. Like I said, it doesn't take very, very long to do it at all. I think that was probably about 7 or 8 minutes. I'm going to hit enter to reboot, and now we're going to be in evaluation mode for 60 days. What this means is you're going to have a total, you're going to have the Enterprise Plus licensing capabilities available to you for 60 days. So that's what we're going to be going through here. And once that expires, then you'll have to apply a license to it. There are some command line things you can do to circumvent that, but I don't show that. But there are capabilities out there. It is Linux on the back end, so there are ways of manipulating that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the enter key to reboot it, and it's going to go ahead and reboot. And then I'm actually going to go to here. I'll click off this guy. I'm going to right click on 554. We go to edit settings. I'm going to click on the CD DVD drive here. I'm actually going to connect the power on. I'm going to disconnect it, because now the everything that came from the ISO file is now installed on the hard drive. This hard drive right here. I'm going to click OK, and there's a question: you can make changes with the virtual machine powered on. Yes, you can, because remember, a virtual machine is just a folder of files, because you're just manipulating a file. There are certain files you can't manipulate, but most of them you can. So we'll take a look at that as we're going through here. So I'm going to click back on here, and now it's loading ESXi, and I will take just a couple of minutes here, and I will get this set up so that we can go through and see exactly how this boots up. And it doesn't take very long normally, and it's got plenty of memory. So now it's initializing the scheduler. So we have 8 gigs of RAM. This is the CPU. See what I mean by the CPU? It can't lie about the CPU type, but it can lie about how much of the CPU you've been given. Same thing with the memory. I've got 64 gigs available. I'm not actually using all 64 gigs per machine, and on top of that, I'm not using all 8 gigs of RAM for this particular virtual machine. What that implies as well, which is actually kind of nice, is I can actually have 2 virtual machines. Let's say I have a total of 8 gigs of RAM on the board. I have 8 gigs of RAM that I can do whatever I want with. And I have 2 virtual machines, and each one of them I've allocated 8 gigs of RAM apiece to. We might say, well, wait a minute, that would be 16 gigs total. That's true. The thing is with that, though, is each virtual machine has been given a resource allocation, and what that resource allocation does is there's some stuff on the back end. We'll talk about this, reservations, and there's some priorities you can set in place to prevent one virtual machine from starving out another one. But basically what you're doing is you're going to be sharing those resources. And this is one of the nice things about VMware is you're able to, if you need a little bit more memory on one box than what another box actually has, you can actually borrow from Paul, or borrow from Paul to pay Peter. Is it the other way? Beg, borrow, and steal to get the job done. But both virtual machines will still be operational. So we'll take a look at that as we go along. So now this is exactly the screen you would get if you were to install this on a regular machine. So identical. There's absolutely no difference at all what you're seeing here. I'm going to press F2 to log in. I'm going to hit the tab key to go down and type my password. I'm going to hit enter. And then that's going to let me log in. And now I can configure the password, which is what I already did. I'm going to go down to Configure Management Network. I'm going to hit enter. And now I'm going to go down to IP configuration. Now notice how it says network adapters. I only have one network adapter. That's all I gave it. I'll be able to go in there later on and give it more, but for right now I've only given it one. I'm going to go down to IP configuration. And it says right now, use dynamic IP address in network configuration. So basically it knows that it got a IP address, it got a subnet mask, and it got a default gateway. Now how did it get those? Well, pretty simple. I went in there and I configured that stuff into a DCV pool on my Cisco router. So I'm going to go down, I'm going to hit the spacebar to mark that. And now I'm just going to leave this stuff the same. So when my DHCP server goes out and tries to determine which devices have which addresses, he's going to ping it and see what he comes back with. And whatever address responds, he knows whether he can use that address or not. I'm going to hit enter to click OK. Now I'm going to go down to the DNS configuration. And notice how it gave me public IP address DNS. So it gave me Time Warner Cable. I'm going to hit whack out that. I'm going to type in numlock. Type in 192.168.1.160. That happens to be the ESXi domain controller. I have a server 2012 R2 domain controller set up with DNS, and I'm going to have to set up a manual DNS mapping in here. This one's going to be 192.168.1.1, and then this is going to be ESXi5-5-4, and I'm going to hit enter. And now I'm going to escape out of this guy. That's going to ask me to restart the management network, and I say yes, go ahead. And I'm going to be bounced out here. And now I don't have a actual mapping in here for the IP address to name mapping. So when I go to test the management network, I'll be able to ping the default gateway. I'll be able to ping the default gateway, but I won't be able to resolve an address. At least it shouldn't be. Oh, it did work. So my DNS is working. Okay, cool. Actually, I want to configure management network. I want to actually manipulate that. .company.com. Reset it. That's fine. Let's test it again. Okay, now it failed. So that's actually what I was hoping for. So now I'm not going to go in. Yeah. Let me do this real quick. Let me click on 160. This is my Server 2012 box. This is the domain controller. So this is my DC, and I'm running a Windows evaluation license. So I'm going to click on. I have a bunch of stuff that's set up here. I'm going to click on DNS. I'm going to expand DNS. I'm going to go down to forward lookup zones and company. And as you can see right here, I have. It didn't actually work, which is what I expected. So I'm going to actually click in here. I'm going to go to Add New Host. I'm going to type in the name is going to be ESXi5-5-4.company.com. The IP address is going to be 192.168.1.125. And add host. That was created. It sits right there. I can now minimize this guy. Test management network again. See what happens. I'll be able to reach the domain controller, ping the default gateway, and then now it resolves it. So that's a good sign. You're going to need that to happen in order for you to do advanced features like setting up a going out to authentication services, so you could log into the domain, log into the host, the virtual host through Vsphere, without having to type in the username and password. You're going to use your Windows domain credentials to do that. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to hit Escape to get out of this guy, and then this is back to its main setup. So that's all there really is to it. So that's all there really is. That's pretty much all I wanted to show you in this video. I'm actually going to close this guy out, and then I'm basically going to repeat the process for 555 as we go in here and get that situated. I'm going to do a total of 4 hosts, and we're going to see how things differentiate as we go through here. And I'm going to show you, I've already got some things set up in 551 and 552. 554 and 555 will be done a little bit differently. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to set up things like clusters and some other things that I'm going to need to show you guys as we go along and go from there. So pretty straightforward for the most part, but as long as you understand what's going on in the back end, you should be good to go. So I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.